Dimension 6 is about physics, but it's about more than physics. It's about the experience of the physical world, which is a dimension larger than the physical world. But I should say from the beginning that I'm not a physicist. I'm not interested in adding new knowledge to the field. My interest is in a better understanding of what we already know about physics. Here's an example. If you were to take a physical object, anything, something you could hold in your hand, and you were to move it at the speed of light or close to the speed of light, some very interesting things would begin to happen. The object would become shorter, time would pass more slowly, and the object would grow in mass. Now, these are all things that are very well known in physics. We've known about this for over 100 years, and yet we don't understand it. It doesn't fit into our concept of what the universe is. We tend to think of the universe as being an empty box, a space time box that real things are in. And yet, at the extremes of the box, the very large and the very small, the dimensions tend to break down. They blend into each other. Here's another example. We assume that space is just an infinite nothingness, and therefore that we can divide it up infinitely into smaller and smaller pieces, and we just get smaller pieces of nothingness. But that's not true. If we divide space down to the atomic and the subatomic level, the scale of the very small, we find that space tends to mix in with time and with mass. And mass and time tend to mix in with each other. So this runs counter to our assumption that what we're looking at in the physical world is a structure that's independent of consciousness. And the reason I say this is that all of the weird things that are happening about physics, and you probably heard some of these things, they all have to do with space, with time, and with mass. They all have to do with dimensions. And they also have to do with what's called the role of the observer, which, of course, is consciousness. So, therefore, if we're going to understand what modern physics has discovered, we should re examine what we mean by a dimension. What is a dimension? And we should re examine the relation of dimensions to consciousness. We've always assumed that consciousness is inside of people and animals or other living things, and therefore inside of space and time. But what I'm trying to say here is physical science is going to make better sense if we flip that around and we put dimensions inside of conscious experience. It just works better that way in the long run. It's counterintuitive, but we have to begin re-examining our fundamental assumptions. The relationship between consciousness and dimensions has to do with light. Now, if you're standing inside looking out the window and you see a house, and maybe to the right of that, a little ways, there's a tree, and behind the house and the tree is a fence, and beyond that is a road, let's say. Now, there are two different ways of understanding what you're experiencing. Now, alternative number one is the common sense view. And that is that what you're looking at is an external reality. That the house and the fence and the tree and the road, they're out there whether you're looking at them or not. They don't depend on you being there and experiencing them in order for them to exist. And furthermore, your experience of them does not affect them in any way. Okay, now that's the common sense alternative. Now, the second view is that as you're looking out the window, what you're experiencing is patterns of light. Now, they're just as real as in the first alternative, but the dimensions that you see in the building, the house is maybe 30 feet tall, the tree is 100 feet to the right, the fence is beyond that, and the road beyond that. All of these dimensional relations are in the conscious experience. They're in the patterns of light. Now, this is not intuitively obvious, but when you're standing there looking out the window, when your experience is confined to what we would call macroscopic dimensions, that is, inches and feet and miles and seconds and minutes and hours that we're familiar with on the everyday level. If you're confined to these dimensions, as you're looking out the window, you're not going to be able to really see any difference between alternative one and alternative two. They're going to look the same. But if you take into consideration what we now know about the very small dimensions and the very large dimensions, you're going to make better sense of what you're experiencing as you're looking out that window by the second alternative. Because you're not going to try to make hard, rigid, externally existing structures of space and time. They're not going to be out there independent of what you're seeing. They will be part of what you're seeing. So, in other words, what I'm saying here is the physical world is every bit as real in either alternative. But the difference is, in the second alternative, there's a larger context, a larger reality, a more fundamental reality in which we experience the physical world. The physical world is not the ultimate reality. If you're an alert reader, the first thing you do is say, well, why is it that we feel like we are in space? Why is it that we feel like we're moving around in time? Why is it that if you jump out the window, walk across the lawn, and stick your finger out and put that finger right where you see the house, why is it that you feel a tactile sensation? Why is it you can touch those patterns of light? Okay, and I'm not going to go into that right here, but that's in the book. I'm trying to say dimensions are something very, very different than what we have assumed them to be. And it's the dimensional structure of our consciousness that makes you feel that tactile sensation exactly where you see the pattern of light. I think there are going to be two different kinds of readers of this work. The first will be people outside the field of physics, people who are beginning to realize that there's something going on in physical science which is bigger than physics. In addition to this kind of reader, what you might say the outside of the field reader who knows something about physics. I think that's important. The main thing the reader has to have is curiosity about the physical world. it will help to have some background in physics in order to understand what I'm talking about. The other kind of reader is going to be the physicist, the professional. And I challenge them, the person who's going to be much more skeptical of this kind of idea. In general, physicists are very reluctant to engage themselves in this kind of work because they want to restrict themselves to what is concrete physical reality. They don't want to stray into things that are maybe opinion or spiritual or stuff that can stray anywhere beyond the bounds of science. And there's a good reason why they would be that way. But I challenge them to take a look because I think if this idea is going to be generally accepted, the experts have to take a look at it. And I will say right off that I'm not challenging the content of physics. I'm not challenging how we do physics in the professional sense, but I'm challenging the foundation on which it is based. That is the meaning of what's coming out of physical science. That's what I'm looking at. And I think a lot of physicists are beginning to realize that there is a lot of questioning along these lines. I would like to think that readers will take away the answers that I have worked so hard to produce in this book. I hope they read it and say, wow, yeah, this is right. I agree with it. But I know that that's probably not going to happen, at least not right away. So I'm not certain that readers will take away what I am trying to say in terms of my answers. I think they're going to take away the questions. And the questions are probably more important than the answers. Readers, if they want to be in the room when the big paradigm shift happens, which is overdue in the physical world, we're going to have a major revolution in how we understand physical reality, and it's coming soon. If you want to be part of that, then you've got to know those questions and maybe know some possible answers. So that's what I think people are going to take away from it. But I think what is much more important to me than what's happening on the surface is what's going to be happening underneath. Because as we challenge the metaphysical assumptions that physics is based on, as physicists realize they do have metaphysical assumptions, there's going to be a major revolution in how we understand our existence. Now, I'm not exaggerating here, because if we say that the physical world is not absolute and that our living experience of the physical world is more absolute, more fundamental, then that's going to change how we understand what it means to be alive. And that may produce an upheaval of sorts. But that's exactly what we need right now. We need to be re-examining what the meaning of our existence here is. We need to be looking at the relationship between living beings and the physical world. So it may be disruptive in the long run, but I think the long-term arc of this kind of examination, re-examination of who we are and what we're doing here, will make it possible for us to adjust to some very new realities that we're beginning to realize in the world.